I'm Matthew. Oh, there we go. We're recording now. I'm Matthew. I'm the director of tutoring, and this is Mohammed with me. He works with CougarCS a lot, and Mohammed has a lot of interview experience. And we have some good tips we want to give you. We're also going to have a time to practice actual like the HackerRank. We're going to do a HackerRank competition, and you're going to get to practice just doing interview problems, and then we'll go over solutions. But it'll be good practice to be in that pressure situation. You're nervous for the technical interview, Brian? Well, here's where you learn how to ace the technical interview. But yeah, if you look at the agenda, we're just going to go over the types of interviews, good ways to prepare. We'll give you resources, and then we're going to practice and go over the solution. So now I'm going to pass it off to Mohammed. So yeah, Mohammed.
Yep. So hello everyone, welcome to the HackerRank workshop. So now first, just to go talking about today's agenda, first we're going to talk about what is the technical interview, what types of technical interviews you can see if you apply for an internship or full-time role, how to prepare for these interviews, 6 steps to ace these interviews, and helpful resources when it comes to studying for these interviews. And then we will do like a little HackerRank. So for that, we'll go over the problems and then we'll practice them and that are also review solutions, right? So let's go first. What is a technical interview? So technical interview, basically when you apply for a job, you would get usually a behavioral interview, which is just ask you questions about how, like situational questions, how you behave in a workplace. But technical interviews is basically asking you questions about how, if you can code and like testing your algorithmic ability, right? And in these interviews, what they're really actually also trying to see is how you think through problems and how you communicate. So not just that if you can solve the problem, but also how you communicate. So remember, communication is key, right? Now, the types of technical interview, usually there's, so when you apply, usually for a lot of companies, you will get an online assessment. So it's not necessarily an interview as per to say, because there's no interviewer, but this is part of the interview process. So you get an assessment and you would have like 2 to 3 questions, and usually you have like 2 hours to 60 minutes. You have to solve it. And these basically tests are used to filter our candidates. And now I'll talk about how later on how this could be helpful later in the interview process as well, though how well you perform it. Besides just going to the next stage of interview, there could be other usage of these interviews as well, right? And then the real technical interview is usually referred to as phone or final interview. And phone is a little different. So usually in a phone interview, you'll be on a 30-minute call with somebody. They would actually call you and they would send you a link to one of these website, HackerRank, and then you would just basically get on there and you would just kind of do pair coding, and there give you a question or two and then ask you to solve it. And yeah, and final is usually longer. It's usually like 40 minutes to an hour. Sometimes there are multiple rounds in the final interviews. There's like you would have one round with one person, and sometimes they also stack technical final interviews behavioral, so that happens as well. And in these questions you would have another person as well, but this could happen on the phone, or it could happen like like an actual like a video call as well. Now in this interview, it's in both of these type of interviews, phone and final interviews, it's important that you explain your thought process. I'll repeat this multiple times because I think this is one thing that a lot of people miss. They don't really talk through their solution because you're not really used to doing that. Like when we're coding by ourselves, we don't like explain what we are thinking, but this is something you've got to get to used to. And because that's what they're really trying to see, how you think through the problem, how do you break it down into smaller pieces, and how you arrive at a solution. All right. So how to prepare, first I'll give out the obvious advice practice. The reason, even though this is an obvious advice, it's not really obvious, like common practice by, that's interesting. So practice is not common practice, it's obvious advice, but not a lot of people practice before their technical interviews. You make sure you like have time. And now obviously, depending upon how much time you have, your strategy might change, but practice, right? Now, the other advice would be, we will give more resources and what specifically we prefer, or like what we think are the best. Now, in terms of interview questions, at least in my experience and like what I've seen from whatever other people have experienced, majority of companies would ask you questions on simpler topics like arrays, strings, hash tables, heaps, and all that, right? But there would be some companies, especially like bigger companies like Microsoft, Google, and all those, they might ask you harder questions. Like, well, binary trees could also be categorized under easy questions. They might ask you harder questions like dynamic programming, graphs. So if you're going for those companies, you also want to practice. And I will give more tips as to how to prepare for a specific company later on as well. Okay, so during the interview process, choose a language they're most comfortable with. This is the advice that probably your recruiter will also give you. But another thing I would say is, let's say you're not comfortable, like you use multiple languages and you're not comfortable with any one of them. You're deciding which one should I just pick. I recommend pick Python because it's just super straightforward and simple syntax. And like you have to also write less code. Now, granted, if you know more about another language, for example, Matthew really codes a lot in Java. In that situation, I recommend pick that language. But if you don't know what you want to pick, you're unsure, just pick Python. It works for a lot of people. It will work for you as well. Now, obviously, if you know Python, if you don't know, then don't pick it. Time management is key, right? So this is another piece of advice I really want to emphasize. Now, in an interview, they would give, like, when you do questions on lead code, usually you would not think about time because you might get stuck on a question, you might spend a lot of time on it. But in an interview, it's time setting. So the way to train your brain to basically do better under time pressure is to basically do questions on those websites like LeetCode in a time setting. So set up a timer and tell yourself, hey, I'm gonna give myself 30 minutes to solve this problem, and then you can, if you can't solve it, then basically just go look at the solution, move on to the next problem. Don't spend too much time on it, because if you're spending too much time, you're not gonna have that same situation. You cannot spend a lot of time on the interview. So you gotta be able to figure something out. Whether even if it's not the best solution, you gotta be able to figure something out in a short amount of time. Again, I'll emphasize it again. Vocalize your thought process is really important. If you're just jumping into the solution, not saying anything, you're gonna mess up. That's not what they're looking for. We're gonna simplify in this a 6-step process. Right. So first thing, when they ask you a question, usually they will paste a question from like somewhere else into the text editor, or they would just say it to you if it's simple. First thing is really understand what they're asking. If you start right away and start coding and not understand the question, you might go the wrong route and waste a lot of time. So you really want to make sure that you understand what they're asking, what are the inputs, what are the outputs of the problem, and how it's asking you to manipulate that input, right? And then really understand the constraints, right? Could there be negative numbers? Could there be 0? Could there be, like in case of linked list or trees, could there be null pointers, stuff like that? Really try to think about all these edge cases. And you can write maybe 1 or 2 cases. Usually they will give you test cases. And after that, you can do it in comments, or at least just talk it out. Tell the interviewer a plan that you came up with, right? So how do you think you would solve this problem without any code? How do you think you would solve it just from the top of your head, right? And that's important, because once you tell that to the interviewer, they would guide you in the right direction. If that's not something they're expecting, they will tell you to come up with a different approach or try something else. But if you don't say anything, you start writing code, they don't know what approach you're taking right away, right? So tell them your approach. Then implement your code and ask for feedback. Ask questions as you implement your code, right? Ask if I'm going in the right direction, right? And they would provide you feedback, right? That's what they know, that interviewer is there for your success. They're not trying to make you fail the interview. They're really trying their hardest for you to succeed in the interview, right? And at the end, don't forget to talk about time and space complexity. I've done this many times, sometimes I forget, but make sure you don't forget, right? At the end, even if the interviewer doesn't ask you, just talk about it, say, hey, the time complexity, and walk through each function, say, this function would be this space and time complexity, and all these other functions would be this, and the overall would be this, right? Now, helpful resources. So again, these are a bunch of resources. I'll just go through a few based on if you have a short amount of time, because I'm assuming most of you guys have like interviews soon, since it's the hiring season, so you would have short amount of time. And if you haven't done a lot of prep, like I will show you the fastest way to prepare, right? So first, if you have like a little bit time, maybe a couple of weeks, like there's a bunch of resources. If you don't time, just go to LeetCode, practice problems on LeetCode. Don't go to other sources, um, and except with one exception. So go to LeetCode and don't just start practicing question in the order they appear. There's these patterns list called LeetCode patterns list. This is like about over 100 questions. There's like LC 70 blind 75 questions. Practice based on these lists. The reason why these lists are better because they categorize problems in a subset, right? So they will categorize all the dynamic programming problems together, all the tree problems together, all the sliding window problems together. These patterns you would see a lot on interviews, and if you categorize them together and practice them together, you will solidify those concepts in your head, right? You'll become a lot better, right? And even if you're just starting out on your LeetCode journey, these are the best way to get started, right? Once you had that, either with a friend, you can do some mock interviews, right? So actually get with a friend, ask them to ask you a question, you can ask them a question and actually do a practice question. If you don't have a friend or you're just trying to like, just you don't have time or something like that, then just there's this online website called Cramp. And over here, you can also schedule interviews with people also preparing for interviews and just schedule an interview there, and then you can practice there as well. One more piece of advice I'll give is if you're really short on time, right? You really don't have a lot of time, like maybe a week or something like that, then what you should do, the best strategy that I've seen work for many people is so Glassdoor, Reddit, Blind, and LeetCode discussion, right? These are forums, specifically Glassdoor, as like for the most part. You can go there and find questions that are specific to that company. That company's like really trying to ask their candidates, or the question they've asked in the prior interviews, right? And you can also find them on Reddit as well, Blind as well, and LeetCode discussion. So search there, try to find the type of questions they ask, because sometimes company would not really ask you LeetCode questions. Sometimes they might ask you object-oriented design questions. So that's a possibility as well. So you really want to do some research about what type of question they ask. They might ask you SQL questions, right? So you want to be prepared for that part of it. But for the most part, companies do ask algorithm-based questions. And another tip is specifically for big companies, if you go to LeetCode, you see that tag section. In the tag section, what you can do is you can just find the problems that the company has asked in the past and just practice those problems. And a lot of people would just get those problems in their interviews usually, right? So I think that's the only, those are the important pieces of advice that I have. The other things is if you're just refreshing your data structures and algorithms knowledge, so there's some YouTube channels that we think are good, and there's just books that almost everybody already knows about: Cracking the Coding Interview and Elements of Programming. Oh, one thing, for Cracking the Coding Interview, there's a specific section that you want to read. I think it's called section 9, but you would, when you look at the book, you would see that section describes the algorithms and data structures. Other sections has general advice, right? Just read that section, or Elements of Programming, just read the first page of each section just to brush up on your data structures and algorithm skills. But other sections you can read if you want to do the questions in the book. All right, so I think that was all my advice. Okay, and now we will basically go ahead and kind of go through each question. So I will hand it off to Matthew.
First, we had a couple questions in the chat. So Mohammed, Anil says, if you get an online assessment, does that mean you pass some kind of pre-screening, or do all applicants automatically get the online assessment?
It depends. Some companies, I know Citadel is a company that basically they would give online assessment to everybody. So Citadel, Snowflake, some of these companies give out online assessment to everybody, but some companies don't. So like Microsoft wouldn't, or Google wouldn't. So if you get, like, it depends on the company. You could probably do some research on Reddit, but some companies do, some don't. That's the short answer.
Then Anil says, what tips would you give for making the most out of studying LeetCode? Example, when to view solutions, how much to study past problems?
Sorry, can you repeat that? I'll need to.
What tips would you give for making the most out of studying LeetCode? When to view solutions / how much to study past problems?
Okay, so I would say the goal, it depends on the amount of time you have. So if you have a lot of time, that you want to go depth first, so you want to go into each topic deep and really want to understand it really well, really want to understand the intuition behind it. So that's a sliding window. You really want to understand why this concept could, like certain array problems, it could optimize your time complexity. And if you do more problems on that, you would get really good at it. Now, if you don't have time, you want to cover a little bit of ground on each problem. And usually companies don't ask, usually they don't ask hard problems. Most of the time they will ask easy or medium problems. But some companies do, especially the bigger ones, they do tend to ask harder problems, but they don't expect you to get to an answer. But if you have time, go deep into each topic. If you don't have time, cover a lot of breadth in each topic. And the like I said, you should time yourself. And if you can't finish a problem in the amount of time you give yourself, then look at the solution, mark down that question and say, hey, I will come back to this question later on and then do it, all right? Then come back to it later and do it. And yeah, another strategy that is also good is you might want to write down or note down as you're doing questions in a specific category. I guess I will also later on share the categories with you guys when we share we're going to share something, a doc at the end for this workshop. So in that, I'll also put a list of categories that I think I've seen, or like most people see in these interviews, like the ones that I just talked about, data structures and their algorithms as well. But as you're doing questions in each category, you want to write down the amount of time it took you to do a certain problem, difficulty of the problem, and if you were able to come up with an optimal solution or not. Based on that, you can revisit certain categories. So let's say you have not done linked lists in like 2 months and you just forgot how to do anything in linked list. Maybe you want to go ahead and revisit it, right? If you've done it like recently, then obviously you should try other topics.
Okay, yes. And then Rodrigo, yes, going through the list of LeetCode patterns. And then blind 75 is split up into groups. You want to hit problems from each group. So you just, to get a good diversity to the problems that you can do. So yes, LeetCode patterns. We put a link in the slides. We'll send out the slides after. We'll send you all the link. So now we are going to do a HackerRank competition. First, let me go over. We're going to go. There are 3 problems in this HackerRank competition. We'll give you all about 15 minutes for each problem. So I'm just going to go over problem 1 really fast. So this is considered an easy problem. It's called Ice Cream Parlor on HackerRank. In some places, like on LeetCode, it's called twosome. It's a very common interview question. The basic rundown is you're given an array of numbers and you have a target number. And you have to return an array, a different array, that has the indexes of 2 numbers that add up to our target. So in example 1, our target was 4, right? And so 2 and 2 add up to 4. So we return the index of 2 and 2, which they're using 1-based indexing. So it's at spot 2 and spot 3. In example 2, our target's 3. The 2 numbers in this array that add up to 3 are 1 and 2. So we return index 1 and index 5 as an array. So they give you an array, they give you a target, and you have to return the indexes. That's basic problem 1. The constraints are there. Your target will stay within that size, and then you can assume your array's size greater than 2 and less than 10,000. So yeah, that's problem 1.
All right, so problem 2, basically, so the problem is called making anagrams. So first I'll explain what an anagram is. Anagram is just basically 2 words that have the letters rearranged, right? So yeah, you look at some examples right now, but you're given 2 strings and you have to find the minimum number of deletions you have to do from each string to make them anagrams, right? So one example here is CDE and ABC, right? So if you look at it, the strings that are not common between these, at least the characters that are not common between these strings are DE and AB. So if you delete those from each string, you would end up getting C, which is an anagram. A single character could also be an anagram, right? Second example, you have man and woman, right? And in that one, if you delete WO from the second one, you get man. They're also anagram. So let's say these letters were arranged, right? The letters in man were arranged. It was like NAM or something like that. That would also work. So it would have the same solution. Now, in this one, this is the constraint on your string length. So it could be up to 10,000 characters, or 1 to 10,000. And another thing, this is important to note, is all your characters are only lowercase ASCII. So it's from lowercase A to Z.
Okay, and then problem 3, the last one. It says difficulty easy here. Some places it's difficulty medium, but I would say that this is a little on the easier side of like stuff you'll get in an interviewing question. But the idea is you're given a string of brackets, and it can only be brackets from that sequence: curly braces, parentheses, and actual brackets. It can only be one of those 6 characters in the string. And your goal is to output yes if the brackets are balanced, and no if the brackets aren't balanced. So you can see in the example we've given here, that first example, for every open bracket, we have a closed bracket and it's in the correct spot. So if you look at example 2, the middle of the string, we have an open bracket, but then the curly brace closes it, which isn't correct. So we return no there. So they give you the string and you have to output yes or no if it's balanced or not. That was just a quick overview of the problems. Now I'm going to drop the link to the actual workshop, not the workshop, the HackerRank competition in the chat. Everyone go to that link, join the competition, and then you can go ahead and start. We will give you about 10-15 minutes on the first problem. And then we're going to discuss the solution to the first problem after that. If you want to just continue and finish, if you got the solution really easily, and you want to just continue and you don't want to hear what we have to say, you could just mute us, keep going to question 2. But we're going to spend about 5 minutes, go over question 1, and then we'll give you another 15 minutes to do question 2, and then we'll do the solution, and then we'll do question 3. We'll give you 15 minutes to do question 3, and then we'll go to the solution again. So everyone join the competition. Please let me know if there are any problems with you joining the contest. Actually, could somebody let me know that it worked?
It works.
Yeah.
Cool. Nice. Well, yeah, we will give you all about, let's see. The first one's an easy question. So we'll give you all maybe 12, 10, yeah, 7:40, we'll be back. But yeah, good luck. And we will just be waiting for y'all.
Yep. And if you guys have any questions, you can also drop that in the chat so we can answer.
Yeah.
So Kevin, you don't have to really worry about what main is doing essentially, because usually even in like actual interviews, you will get a function just that you have to implement. You usually don't have to implement that code reading input. So just have to implement the function. So don't worry about what that is doing. Just focus on the parameters and like how you should manipulate it to get the output.
Okay, we'll give y'all maybe 3 more minutes and then we'll go over the solution. Give you like 1 more minute.
And don't worry, Kevin, if you're confused, we're gonna explain the solution to the problem right now. So
I'm looking through some of y'all's submissions and they're good, but I've yet to see someone give a submission that would pass an interview. Oh, lies. I have one. Unless that was Muhammad. No, that's not Muhammad.
yeah, I didn't think it was probably somebody from the participants.
Yeah, that's good. Phillip Sidaria. That was a good solution.
Hello.
Nice. Yeah, you did good. Okay, so now I'm gonna go over problem 1's solution. Even if you got it, which actually really a few of y'all got it, like it accepted, it compiled, and you had the right output, but it might not have been the best way. Phillip was the only person that I had who did it the best. But okay, so this problem, right? We have an array and we have a target. So the first like solution that comes to mind. This is if I'm in an interview. This is called what we call brute force, right? Kind of. You just have a nested for loop, right? You have one loop that's tracking the index. So we start at 1, and then we loop through. Inside, we have a nested loop that goes to, does 1 plus 2 add up to 4? Does 1 plus 2 add up to 4? Does 1 plus 8 add up to 4? No. And then our main loop goes up 1, and then we check, does 2 plus 2 add up? And then it does, and then we break. Only problem work, which a lot of y'all had solutions that work like that. Only problem is nested loops are not great, because our runtime or time complexity is O of n squared. So if I gave you an array of size 10,000, you're doing that so many times. So you're going through the array a lot. Ideally, we don't want to do that. If you give that solution, it's still good. It shows that you know how to, you get the process. But if we're in an interview and you give me that solution, yes, Phillip, it's O of n squared. If we're in an interview and you give me that, the interview is going to be like, good job, but can you do it faster? And at this point, you're going to be like, I don't know. I think I saw Matt, your solution was interesting. The one that didn't compile. I think Matt started at the front and the back and then tried to come towards mid, right?
Yeah, yeah. I had the while loop wrong. And yeah, and I think it was just the while loop, sorry.
So yes, it didn't compile, but another problem with that is that only works if the list is sorted. Otherwise, you're skipping over certain elements, because you were checking if it was less than or greater than mid, and that's how you're increasing your indexes. That only works if your list is sorted. But here, I'm about to go over the solution. There's a way that we can solve this in O of n time, not just O of n squared. But it was a good attempt, Matt. It was good to see that someone was thinking outside of that. But yeah, let's go to the problem one solution. So currently we have this in Python, because Python's very easy to read. It's a lot less text. We have a solution document that we'll upload after this, and it will have Python and it'll have C++ for those of you who like C++. But if you're looking at this right now, if you don't know that's first or second line, complement equals curly braces, that's a dictionary. So the optimal way really is to use a hash map or a dictionary in Python, because the idea is to check if there's something that adds up to this element, right? If we want to do this in O of n, we need to be able to check this, is there something else in the array? But the only problem with the nested for loop is you find out it takes O of n to retrieve that. So we're doing O of n times O of n. A hash map or a dictionary, our retrieval time is O of 1. So we just have one loop. Like here it says, for index num in enumerate array at 1. If you don't know what enumerate does, I've put an example down at the bottom. It just gives you index value pairs, key pairs, basically. And it starts at 1. That array comma 1 is there just because the question specified one based indexing. So we're starting from 1 instead of 0. But yeah, if I gave you that array 7 3 5 9 2 3, it would output 1 1 7. That's what that in enumerate does. So our loop is currently going through that, our index and the num. So, and then it checks. Well, actually, let's ignore the if for 1 second. In that loop, we're putting each element. So like, let's say our target was 8, let's say our target was 8, and we're putting target minus the current num at that spot. So if we were on 7, right, we do 8 minus 7. So complements at 1 in the dictionary, that key is going to be equal to the value we store is the index where we're currently at. So we're saving the index in our hash map, basically, at the spot of the value that we have. So complements of 8 minus 7 is 1, right? So later, that if statement is going to check if we hit a 1 later on in that array, it's going to check if 1 is in complements, which if we've already hit the complement before, we would have done the target minus the current number and stored the index, right? So let me just talk you through this one right here. Let's say we hit the 3, right? We're at spot 2 in this array. We've hit the 3, and it's currently 3 isn't in our complement, isn't in our dictionary. It's going to store 8 minus 3, so complements at 5 equals index 2, right? So in our dictionary, we have a 5 pointing to a 2, and 5 is the complement that we're looking for. Later in this loop, the next iteration actually, we're going to say if 5 is in complement, so if that key is in complements, which it is, right? That means earlier in the array, we've hit the complement to that, we've hit that. So then it's just going to return complements at 5, so it's going to pull the index of that previous position, right? And then it's going to return the index of where it currently is. So we have both the indexes. So we return both of those as a list. But the idea is to use a hash map. If you don't, if you're a little rusty on hash maps, it's a very common thing to use. If you go through like a lot of elite code easy problems, you're going to be using hash maps, hash sets. And it's just the idea of a histogram, basically. You want O of 1 retrieval time. We're using the value itself as our key. I'm trying to check the chat at the same time. I don't know what's they're just talking about. Cool. But yeah, you want to practice data structures like this. If you don't understand completely what I'm talking about, we'll put out the solution doc. You can go over it later, and you can ask us questions later. But right now we need to keep it moving. So now we're going to go to problem 2. So go ahead and attempt that. And yeah, we'll give you all about 15 minutes for that one too. We'll give you all another like 5 minutes.
All right, guys. It seems like we don't have a successful submission so far. So it seems like you guys, this was a little tougher, but I think that's good. So you guys are getting experience. And don't worry, we're gonna go over the solution now. And I think I'm gonna kind of explain what to do in a problem like this when you really don't know what you're doing. Like when you don't know how to begin the problem, because this problem basically throws on something really hard at you. Like like you have to like look at two strings and you have to determine how many characters you have to delete from each one so that they're anagrams, which is already an interesting concept on its own. That like basically two strings with characters rearranged. So first thing is usually in problems like this, you really want to look at the constraints. So if you look at the constraints, the one thing that it points out is all the characters are lowercase ASCII characters from A to Z, right? So that's important. That's something we need to keep in mind. That tells us that we have a limit on the type of characters we have, and we only have these, right? So that would be only 26 characters, right? So knowing that, another intuition you really want to think about is think about what are anagrams, right? What makes two things anagrams? Well, what makes two strings anagrams is they have the same characters. So not just the same characters and like as in characters, like if one has A, the other one has A, but also they have the same number of A's or same number of B's, right? So they have the same number and same amount, right? Same characters and same amount of characters, right? So that is something you want to keep in mind. Now, which means that the thing that wouldn't make them anagram is any number of characters that are different, right? So that is your key to solving this problem. So any number of characters that are different would prevent them from being anagrams. And you have to find them, how many of those characters are preventing these strings from being anagrams, right? So in the first scenario, we have 4, right? Because D and E and A and B were prevented. Yeah, that's basically it, right? So like Matthew said it, right? You have to check how many wouldn't match in the other one, right? That's what the goal is, right? And now you can probably think about like several ways of keeping track of characters in one and then matching, making sure that those exist in the other one, and whatever the difference is, that would be basically your answer, right? Now that there are different ways of doing this. Now one approach I will show you is hold on. So one approach I'll show is using just an array. Since we know that our strings can only have 26 characters or different type of characters from A to Z, lowercase, it's easy that we just initialize a frequency array, right? And each index in the array would correspond to a character. So first index would correspond to a second would correspond to B, and so on and so forth, right? And then this, as the name suggests, we would put the frequency of each character, right? So we'll first go through the first string, and we'll count how many times each character appears, right? So that's pretty self-explanatory. This ORD function, what basically does, it gives you the ASCII equivalent of this. And when you do ORD subtract A, that will basically shift those equivalent value so that they start from 0, right? So for A, you would get 0 since ORD is A minus RD, A would be 0, and then you get the other ones as you want, right? And you count the number of times the character appears, and then you want to do the inverse of that, the opposite of that, in the other for the other string. And the reason why we're doing this is you want to cancel out the same characters, right? So any characters that are same in the both strings, you want to cancel out, right? So in our prior example, we have C and C in both, right? So you want to cancel out, there's one C in both. So you want to, like, first one would increment C, the other one would decrement C, right? And we want to leave everything else, right, as it is, right? Now, and again, like this, in these examples, we don't have an example where we have multiple ones, but let's say we had multiple ones. Yeah, I've seen frequency array technique before. Yeah, that's true, right? Like this is like a lot of these techniques, like they're pretty standard. Like you would see a lot of these techniques used in these problems. So the only way to really wrap your hand around is to like do problems that are similar in nature. There's definitely another problem as well. Then maybe I could show at the end, like basically send it out in the document. But there's another problem with histogram that uses a similar technique to this, right? So you practice a lot of these problems, you get the hang of these patterns. And when you see the question in the interview, you recognize the pattern and you just go with that, right? So when you see these characters, you subtract C from C, right, the number of times, and then you get the other ones, right? And let's say there were multiple ones, right? Let's say there was, I don't know, 3 A's in the man, and then there were 2 A's in the woman, right? What you would do is, for first time, you would count +3 in the A, and the second time, for the second loop, you would do -2. So that would tell you there's 1 A that is not in the second one, right? And these values for each characters would end up being positive or negative, depending upon which one has more characters, which one of the strings has more characters that don't match, right? And at the end, all you want to do is you want to take absolute value. We don't care if it's positive or negative, if the first string has more characters or the second string has more, and we don't even care about the position. So you notice how this is really subtle and elegant in a way that it doesn't really care about the position, right? And that's what we want. We don't care about the position. We just care about if they exist, all right? And they are equal amounts. So you want to take absolute value, whether it's in the first one or the second, you want to add them up, and that will tell you the total number of characters, and then just return that. Yep. All right. So I think that's a problem. Oh, okay, hold on. So before we move on, yeah, I was about to forget again. So what do you guys think is the time complexity of this solution? Yep. Good. Okay, you still got it. Right. Good. Everybody good. Yeah. So even if you, okay, so yeah, Matthew mentioned that if you, even if you brute force it, that's a good start, right? Like it's better to get to some solution in an interview than to get to no solution. So it's good if you could just brute force it. And then usually what you end up happening is the interviewer would say, okay, so can you do better? And then they might nudge you in the right direction by giving you a hint, which could lead you to a solution like this, right? So brute force is fine to begin with, and then try to do a better solution afterwards, right? Now, do I learn? Because well, you learn you start learning time complexity in data structures. You also explore further, like from a mathematical point of view, in 3320. But I would say it's not really necessary. Like the if you practice lead code questions, you would notice they have a certain pattern, right? Like double for loops, like a squared. Like you might have like if you were doing like a recursion, right, you might have 2 to the n. Like you would see these patterns and you would do enough problems that you wouldn't have to really worry too much about mathematical part of it, and you'll be able to tell a time complexity just by looking at the problems. So I'll just say don't worry too much about what they teach you in class. Just do your own practice, and when you do practice problems on lead code, like without looking at the answer, try to tell the time complexity, right? And if you got it right, that's good. If you didn't get it right, then write down what you missed, right? And study that. So I think self-studying is much more easier than like relying on coursework. Coursework is good to build your basis, but don't completely rely on it for your interviews because it may not give you all the tools you need, right? Would an n log n would pass the test? Uh, so I'm not sure. I think the solution I just presented is the most optimal one. I'm not sure if an n log n would pass the test. You can try it out. If it does, that's good. But yeah, I'm not sure. Uh, sorting to solve it. That could be it. You could try it out. If it passes, that's good. But yeah, that's also an interesting strategy. So you could use sorting as well. Yeah. Since we don't care about the position, that could be interesting approach as well, right? You could sort them. All right, good job coming with a different approach. All right, now I think we're gonna move on to the next problem. So you guys can start working on the next problem, and then we give you guys another 10 to 15 minutes, and then we will get back to you after that, right? Yeah, sometimes, especially in strings, you might have to like split it and convert it into a character array to do it. And usually strings are not like considered non-mutable. So you would have to probably ask your interviewer if you could do that or not.
we'll give you all about 3-4-ish minutes, and then I'll go over the solution. Oh, okay. All right. Yeah. We are going to go over the solution. This is another one that actually we had someone, I think, Bryant, you were the closest. Yaneli, you were also pretty close, but a couple things wrong. Bryant, you're pretty close. There are just some logic things in there we got to fix. But so overview, quick refresher. We're given a string and we need to check if the brackets are balanced. So I changed up example one a little just to show that you can't just check the first and last characters. But you want to check if there's an open bracket, there needs to be the corresponding closing bracket, and then everything inside those brackets basically also needs to be balanced, and everything inside those brackets it's kind of like recursion, but we're not going to use recursion for this. The idea you need to see, like the concept that you have to see, is that for the most recent open bracket, we need, if we hit a closed bracket, it needs to match the most recent open bracket we've hit in the string. So if you have a way of checking the most recent open bracket against the closed bracket we've hit in the string, then that's basically the crux of the problem. This problem, the best idea would be to use a stack, because first in, last out, which means, so let's say I'm iterating through the example, right? I add all my open brackets to the stack, and then the moment I hit a closed bracket, I can look at the most recently put on open bracket, right? That helps us solve that issue of trying to find the most recent open bracket to match that. Because when we peek from the stack, it's the first one off is the last one that we just put on there. That's why we use a stack for this problem. So actually, let's just take a look at the code for this, and it's pretty easy. Again, it's in Python. So we're looping through the string, right? If we hit an open bracket, we add it to the stack, and then we just continue, right? Else, if it's not an open bracket, that means it must be a closed bracket, right? So then we need to check if the last thing on the stack matches the current closed bracket. First, I check if the length of the stack is 0, because I can't peek or pop without getting an error. If the stack is 0 and we've hit a closed bracket, that means there wasn't a corresponding open bracket first there. So that's wrong, and we would just return no. We would break right there. Bryant, I think this is the problem you were getting. You were checking if the stack was empty, but it was on the right side of your OR. So it was popping, and then it was checking if the stack was empty. So if you'd flipped those, it would have checked the stack empty first, and you never would have got, you never got that error. That's why you're getting a segmentation fault. Yeah, so we just solved it, and you'd also notice that you check that every time in that if. So if you just put it first, you don't even have to worry about getting a fault of the stack. So we check that. If the stack's empty and we've hit a closed bracket, we return no. Then we check if the current one that we're on, if it's a closed bracket, we just have to check if it matches, right? The one on the top. So we pop off in each if statement, we're popping off on the first item. And if it equals, if this one equals this one, right? If they're a match, we just continue, right? It just keeps going through the if statement. And we've gotten rid of the most recent open bracket. So that one's balanced. We don't even need to check it anymore. We're on to the next, not the next recent, but the next most recent bracket that was in our stack, which I guess is farther left in our string. But yeah, we just keep doing that. We check if it's the closed bracket matches the most recent open bracket. If it doesn't, we just return no, right? We break and return no. If we've gotten through this whole loop and we haven't returned no yet, that means all of those brackets were balanced. All the closing brackets match the open bracket on the top of the stack. And then we exit. Every time that I've written this, like, I don't know, the first couple times that I wrote this, I would always just return yes at the end, like I'd return true. But you have to catch the fact that even though you're done with the string, if there are still open brackets on the stack, right? Like if we didn't find a closing bracket to pop it off, to get rid of it, if there was no complement, then it still wasn't balanced. Like if they ended the string with an open bracket, we never would have checked that bracket, right? So we have to check one more condition at the end. We check if the stack is empty, then we can return yes. That means all the open brackets had a complement. If it's not empty, that means somewhere in there, else if is yes, elif is else if in C++, correct. Yeah, if it's not empty, that means we had an open bracket that didn't have a closing bracket to complete it. So then we would return no. That's the only if statement. So that is the solution for problem 3. You want to use a stack. Thank you for everyone who competed, and I'm sure there are questions.
One thing you might want to go over the time complexity.
Oh yes, thank you for reminding me. Does anyone have an idea about this solution, what the time complexity would be?
Yeah, both time and space complexity. Since
Space too. Yes, space is important. Anyone? O of n time, O of n space, Philip. Yes, that is correct.
That is correct.
Why is
'Cause,
that correct? Yeah, because we're looping through the string once, right? We'll never do that more than once. So that's O of n. And then it's O of n space because our stack can get only as big as the characters in the string. So yes, we'll never go over O of n time and O of n space. That's correct. Yes, is there anything else that I missed, Mohammed?
No, I think that's it. So
Okay. Is there anyone who has actually, do you have any closing remarks, Mohammed, before we open the floor for questions?
yeah, so I guess before we should first have like people ask questions, and then I can say my remarks. Yeah, so if anybody has any questions, drop it in the chat. Feel free to just unmute yourself, ask.
So this was really helpful because I was pretty intimidated going into knowing that there's going to be a technical aspect to interviews, but these easy questions don't seem that overwhelming. I do have to freshen up on C++. I haven't, because I haven't coded really in a while and really looked at like leak code. But is this kind of like those 3 questions a realistic expectation going into aside from like looking in the Glassdoor and kind of get into a specific company? Is it kind of realistic to expect easier medium questions coming from companies?
Yeah, so I would say from my experience, and I like usually talk to other people who also interviewed at a lot of companies. What I've noticed is most companies, like I would say up to 80%, just ask easy medium questions. So those questions you just saw today, easy medium questions on lead code, that's what most companies ask. Some companies in their final round might ask hard questions, but then if they do ask hard questions, they don't expect you to get to optimal solution right away. Maybe they expect you to go in the right direction, but they don't expect you to just arrive at the optimal solution in like half the amount of time and perfectly do it. So if as long as you communicate, you should be fine even on a hard question.
Gotcha. Okay, cool. Appreciate it. Yeah, because being in the data structures and algorithms really makes things kind of intimidating, but it's reassuring and walk through this. So thank y'all for that.
Yeah, no problem.
Stella, I was typing up an answer to your question, but she asked how much time they usually give us for one question. It depends, one, if it's an online assessment and if it's an in-person interview. And it also depends on the difficulty of the question. So like easy questions, they might give you 15, 20 minutes max, because they think in their head it's an easy question. And a lot of times the first couple technical interviews, like the first rounds, they're trying to weed out people. So if they give you an easy question, you don't like know the answer instantly, not instantly, but if they don't see that you've prepared, they can kind of tell if someone has prepared or not. And so they might give you a little bit of time. They won't give you a lot of time, basically, is what I'm saying for an easy question. For harder questions like dynamic programming and graphs and stuff, like Mohammed just said, they're probably going to give you a little more time because you're going to have to sit down and think more about your approach and talk through it with them in an in-person interview. Online assessments, actually, Mohammed, you've taken a bunch of those. How much time do you say they give you for those?
Usually they give you like an hour, and sometimes they give you more. Usually they try to keep it to an hour because they don't want you to spend a lot of your time on an online assessment. So usually an hour, 3 to 4 questions, something like that. Sometimes 2 questions. Yep.
Okay, cool. Kevin, you asked, would you start with LeetCode or HackerRank? Both are good. Personally, I like LeetCode more because one, I don't know, there are more problems on there. There are a lot of problems on there. And if you want to pay for the premium subscription, you can have access to a lot of stuff for like interviews, like company specific interview questions. But LeetCode also, they evaluate your runtime and your space complexity, which I like because that's really important. When you do any question you want to answer, you want to know your solution's space and time complexity. HackerRank is good to know, like just know how to use it because a lot of online assessments you'll get on HackerRank. I think Kevin just said he sent me a technical interview on HackerRank and I plan on rejecting it because I'm 100% going to fail. Is that bad? I would I would encourage you to not.
Yeah.
You miss 100% of the shots you don't take, Kevin. So yeah, you got to try it. If you don't try it, you failed, right? Already. So at least give it a shot. The more you practice, you just get more experience. So in an interview in the future, you're going to feel much better if you do it right now. Like you get the nerves out of the way now and try it.
Yeah, I've personally done online assessments, like especially with like these quant firms and big like trading firms. They give really notoriously difficult online assessments, and I still do their online assessments as well, even though they're really hard, like dynamic programming hard questions. They still do it just so that you can like, you know, get in the zone, do it. Like don't doubt yourself. Even if you don't know how to do it, just do it for practice. You know, get better at it by doing more. So yeah. One thing I would add, you asked, should we go with lead code or HackerRank? I personally think lead code is better in a sense that lead code has more community. So if you're trying to find an answer to a question online, you can easily find YouTube videos, you can find discussion forums, you can find a lot more information about a lead code question versus a HackerRank questions. And sometimes I personally notice on HackerRank, you see questions and they might have spelling errors or other mistakes. So for that reason, I wouldn't really use HackerRank, but again, if you prefer the environment and all that, you can use it. But lead code, you would find more resources to if you're trying to find answers to questions. Yeah, quant firms are crazy. Yeah, they pay a lot of money, but they also ask you really hard questions too. Okay. Yeah, so one of the highest quant firm they pay around like $96 an hour, which is like crazy. Like for an intern, it's just like that's a lot of money, way too much money. Um, um, I will for behavioral again. But I will give some advice. I guess I will talk about that as well. I do have some tips, but again, uh, you practice and then tell yourself that you can do it, right? Like, don't tell yourself that you can't do it. Like, if you believe in your head that, hey, I'm not good at technical interviews, like I constantly like, there's been time when I've told myself, you know what, this interview, I got an interview at Robinhood, and I was like, you know what, Robinhood is a pretty cool company. Like, I'm not sure if I'm smart enough for them and all this. And then I literally bombed an easy question. That question wasn't hard at all. And I still regret it, right? Like, you don't want to tell yourself that you can't do it, right? You want to tell yourself you can do it, even if like if you tell yourself you can do, you're gonna choke on an easy question. So first, believe in yourself. Sounds like cliche advice, but it works. Second, like I said, do research on this specific company and like find on Glassdoor, Reddit, do those questions and do like tagged questions on lead code. That would shorten the amount of time you have to spend on preparing for them. But that's what I would say, really the best advice. Manifest. Yeah, no problem. Like we're happy to help you guys out. One advice I also have is if you do also struggle understanding the solution to a problem, so if you had trouble understanding the solution to one of the problems we presented today, one thing that really helps me a lot is write down on paper, like actually like look at the problem, look at the input, write down on paper, do it by hand, right? This has helped me understand a lot of dynamic program problems. Do it by hand and like actually do each step by hand, and then you build the intuition behind the problem, why one thing is better than the other, and that will really help you understand it. And like really, you know, once you have that intuition, you have it in your head, and then once you see a similar problem in the interview, you'll be able to solve it. Yep. So does anybody else has any questions? Yep. We're really grateful to help you guys out. If you guys have any questions, you can like message us on Discord. You probably see me and Matthew on there. Like I have a potato in my
Oh,
picture.
yes.
Yeah,
Thank you
and
for reminding me. I'm going to upload. Okay, I'll upload the slides and the solutions document right now here.
yeah, just put it in the chat. So yeah.
This is the slides, and then the solutions document in C++ is here. It's got C++, Python, and it's got our typed explanations kind of. It's just a little more in depth. I think Mohammed, you were going to link some resource to LeetCoder. I forgot what it was you said earlier on the solutions document.
That was a question. I'll probably share it in like CougarCS Discord later. I need to find it.
Yeah.
One thing I'll also say, if you're like new and like you're a beginner, if you go into CougarCS Discord, there's a channel called Resources under career section, career category. That there are some guides that I wrote there. So I'm trying to just help all students at U of H. So it has a guide about interview, master the interview game. That's a cheesy name, uh, but that's not how I wanted to name it. But yeah, so you can maybe you can drop the link in the chat because I don't have just hold on. Let me see if I can find it. But this has like tips. Like I didn't learn all the things that I told you guys by myself. I basically did a lot of research on YouTube and all that. So that's how I got to know all of these things, the tricks.
Oh, Man City fan. Oof. How does it feel to lose a PSG? That's fun. I'm messing with you. But yeah, if you have any questions, you can find both of us on Discord. There are also, if you're in the member hub, you can ask us questions like career related questions. We do like, resume reviews. I'm asking Mohammed for help on stuff too, because he's got a lot of experience in that area. There's the link. He just dropped the link with a lot of his resources. But if you don't have any, it sounds like we're done today. Thank everyone. Thank you all for coming
Thank you for
to the
coming.
workshop. Thanks for competing and asking questions. And good luck to all of you who are about to go into your technical interviews, behavioral interviews, whatever you have coming up. Yeah, good luck. Thanks for coming. And we will see you on campus or text us on Discord.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Right.